If you were a fan of R&B in the late 2010s, chances are you've heard of the name Ella Mai. She's one of the few who shot into stardom very quickly and gave the genre some life when people were thinking it needed it most. Now, I think genres are a bit of an antiquated system of classification these days as music continues to evolve and coalesce into sounds that are hard to define as simply as we'd like. But R&B is inherently tied to Ella Mai, and today's video is all about her story and role in being an unlikely star that saved a genre. Okay, I'm gonna stop being dramatic now, but seriously, I've been researching and preparing for this video for a few weeks, and dozens of hours of interviews later, I think Ella Mai's story is really cool and awesome to think about, so I want to share it. But I'm also going to cover how she's grown and evolved through her music, and what we can expect from an elusive third album. But before we get there, we need to understand who Ella Mai is. Like any good story, let's start at the beginning. Born in Mitcham, South London, 1994, with a teacher for a mum and a minister for a grandma, Ella was named after one of her mum's favourite jazz artists, Ella Fitzgerald. Right from the beginning, music was in her blood. And like most of us, any sort of musical interest and appreciation starts with our parents, and her mum was a big fan of Lauryn Hill, with Ella consistently praising the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill as her favourite album of all time, due to no small part of her mum having the CD, or if not possible, the cassette tape blasting wherever she could. Her singing dreams started young, but she didn't seem to have that laser focus of making it a reality by this point. She was in a performing arts school, but was just sort of getting it done. But let's fast forward to one of many major moments and changes in her life, leaving England and moving to the United States. The first time. With her mum getting a new teaching job in New York, 12-year-old Ella came with her and stayed with her family in Jamaica, Queens. This meant that her key foundational years were in a New York high school and the US education system. Becoming a teenager and being British naturally got her teased with kids asking how to pronounce banana or if she knew the Queen. All in all, this sort of attention that being different caused her made her ditch singing to avoid more eyes being on her. Which is such a crazy thing to think about. I mean, we're talking about high school bullying, although I use the term lightly because she's never claimed it as such. But who knows what her life could have turned out to be if she never circled back around to singing in her future, all because she wanted to fit in more at school. And that was really the case. It wasn't like she was secretly having vocal lessons after school. Becoming a singer was really out of her mind at this point as she shifted her focus to playing soccer with dreams of going pro. But just like that, 5 years passed and she graduated high school in 2012, essentially growing up as an American in the late 2000s and early 2010s. After graduating, Ella and her mum returned home to England and she was faced with life after high school, and the decision of doubling down on her bold dreams or looking back to music. After deliberating with her mum, she went to a school for music where she'd learn about the music industry, write her first song, join a girl group and go on X Factor, learn vocal techniques, write essays on music history, just standard stuff. But it was in 2015 when her whole life would change. Like many, our greatest introspection and existential thoughts happen in the shower, and it was there when she decided that she really wanted to take this music thing seriously. The thought that stuck with her and encouraged her was that her family knows she can sing, her friends know she can sing, but what was she doing for the world to know she can sing? And so to Instagram she went after recording her first cover. You might have seen some, but it all started with Fetty Wap's 679. Feel old yet? But as luck would have it, and I mean seriously, her story is insane, that first video got picked up by the Shade Room and went viral. From 500 followers made up from school friends and other people you meet in life, that 15-second clip changed her life, but this was still just the beginning. She started getting requests, was gaining more and more followers, and was eventually contacted by hit-making producer DJ Mustard. You know, Rack City. Now I want to get into the real meat and potatoes of this video and stop recounting her life, but I mean, no words. Just an insane series of unbelievable events occurred from this point on. She happens to meet with Mustard as she randomly visits some friends in New York while he happens to be in Philadelphia for a festival, and so they link up and get into the studio and make 3 songs from like 10 PM to 5 AM. Before you know it, she's transatlantic living, flying from London to LA pretty regularly to make more songs with Mustard, which eventually come to be her 3 EPs, after being the first person signed to Mustard's new label, 10 Summers. Just a quick recap. English baby living in London, likes Lauryn Hill, moves to New York as a 12-year-old, graduates, moves back to London, wants to sing again, goes to music school, does the X Factor, retail job at Topshop, uploads 15-second Instagram covers, receives DM from established producer, meets up, makes songs, gets signed, releases 3 EPs, has a hit, releases an album, wins a Grammy? Okay, alright, I got it, and we're getting ahead of ourselves now. I still want to touch on her musical inspirations because they play a huge role in helping Ella Mai define her sound and develop her musical identity, and it really stems from a strong love for 90s and 2000s R&B. While she loves Brandy, Monica, Mary J. Blige, Mariah Carey, Destiny's Child, Beyonce, and the usual suspects, the two that make the biggest impression on her artistry, I think, are Lauryn Hill and Chris Brown. Especially as she gets older, which we'll get to, she really appreciates tapping into that more raw and vulnerable side which Lauryn Hill did so well. You can just hear the passion and emotion behind every single lyric, and even in the instrumentation of her work, while Ella seems more influenced by Chris Brown's vocal ability. But something I didn't mention in that little recap that I think is really telling about the type of person and artist that Ella Mai is that Mustard wasn't the only person to reach out to her during her group days or her Instagram era. She was contacted by at least one UK-based label, but she turned them down, as a 19-year-old who you would imagine would leap at that opportunity, but no. She knew her value and she knew what English labels do to R&B artists, and didn't want to be another statistic that was turned into a pop artist. So to me, that's another crucial moment that could have taken her career in a completely different direction, and shows her resilient attitude, self-belief, and unwavering love for the genre that made her, R&B. And now that we know a little bit about Ella Mai and the foundation that raised her, let's dive into the more nitty-gritty, starting with her trio of EPs, Time, Change, and Ready. The 3 EPs were made to be an introduction to Ella Mai, loosely defining her sound and giving people an insight into what type of artist she is and can be. To that point, showcasing versatility was a huge point of emphasis, not only for the aspiring artist in Ella Mai, but DJ Mustard too. So each EP generally showcases a different tempo and vibe. Ella's called Time, slow, melodic, and trap soul-y, with its own level of bounce. Change is very R&B, as in melodic and quite slow with 1 or 2 bouncy songs. Whereas Ready was all about having fun and making music that people could vibe to, whether you like R&B or not. Despite the disparate releases, pretty much every song on these tapes were made either in that first studio session she had with Mustard the first time they met in New York, or during her various back and forth trips from London to LA. So to timestamp it, we're talking late 2015 to early 2016 for most of the songs. The first thing I want to talk about though is what you would expect sonically from a West Coast hip-hop producer who had briefly been dabbling in EDM, and a transatlantic London, New York and LA based 20-year-old who loves traditional R&B. And I think we got exactly what we should expect, a fusion of it all. Mustard adapted his sound and did something that nobody knew he could, and created a West Coast inspired R&B sound that playfully complemented Ella's smooth vocals. But what I think is really cool is that this unique fusion also mirrors Ella's upbringing and her own journey of identifying and understanding her own sound, as she fused her 2 distinct childhood environments, London and New York. While it probably didn't mean much to her at the moment, she was pulling inspiration from 2 cultural capitals of the world out of sheer instinct. And speaking of inspiration, something we can trace all throughout Ella's discography is her interest in storytelling through skits and spoken outros. And it starts all the way back here, likely inspired by the artists she grew up loving, as this was fairly common in 90s R&B, specifically with one of her favourites, Lauryn Hill. I think when most of us think of R&B, we either think of lovey-dovey love songs or heartbreak, I Wanna Die music, but Ella has a different approach ever since these first EPs. She's always wanted to promote positivity in love through her music. Sometimes this is through romantic love songs like Boot Up or Breakfast in Bed, but I'd say the majority of her songs preach self-love and strength in the face of strife. And this is something she undoubtedly pulls from all of her strong independent female idols like Mary J. Blige and Lauryn Hill, but even more so her mum and her grandma who raised her. She isn't trying to be anybody she isn't. Musically, she pulls from what she loves and won't let anybody steer her away from that. And personally, she speaks from the only perspective that she knows, and will always speak her mind. These are some of my favourite things about her, because despite the fame to come, she remains very true to herself, down to earth, grateful, and above all, a fan first. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, Boot Up. I mentioned it before, and that song has some history that I think is insane and again adds to her unreal story. It was one of the last songs recorded for her last EP, being recorded in January 2017 for the EP's release in February, a late addition and a completely unassuming record to her and her team. And seemingly it was just another track for a little over a year. But as the story goes, a renowned DJ from the Bay, King Von, was told to play it in a club one night by a regular. He had never heard it before but decided to play it because he'd seen this guy around pretty often. And the people loved it. From there it got picked up more and more at other clubs, and eventually it landed on the radio, a whole 14 or 15 months after its release. And fitting for a story of unbelievable circumstances, That's really how the song became the hit of the summer and won her a Grammy, but we'll get there. But as Ella would tell you, everything happens for a reason and timing is everything. I think she was very lucky to have been working on her debut album before Boo'd Up completely took over the world and put her name on the map. The pressure to follow up on the success and anticipation of Boo'd Up could have crushed anybody not wanting to be labelled as a one-hit wonder. But in fact, her debut album was mostly done as Boo'd Up was taking off, with Naked being pushed as the lead single, but this life-changing song caused her and her team to pivot. And that's why I say timing is everything here. Because if she felt pressured to rush and release something that didn't touch people the same way, things could have been very different for her. Instead, she released Trip, a song which Mustard instantly knew was the one. So we've now got 2 mega hits out, in a genre that's having a resurgence but at this point is not a radio powerhouse, all before her debut album has dropped. This is an insane amount of success for a 23-year-old who's officially been in the music industry for a little over a year. Having the talent to achieve that success is one thing. Having the mindset to handle it all is another. But speaking of the debut album, it handled the anticipation as well as Ella did, providing a handful of more hits, most notably Shot Clock, which is a clear example of her US influence and cultural understanding as she had to explain the record to her friends back in London. It also saw her team up with one of her musical icons in Chris Brown, allowing her to check that off her bucket list as she slowly came to grips with her idols becoming her peers. But again, like she'll say, she's a fan first and that won't change. But focusing on her as an artist, this self-titled debut album was intended to be a larger introduction to her as an artist than her EPs ever could, especially now with the influx of fans coming from Boo'd Up and Trip. So while she retains her storytelling interludes and skits, the album remains a fun approach to R&B with bouncy feel-good tracks, interspersed with slower heartfelt songs like Everything and Naked. Ultimately, the album served as a broad overview of Ella Mai as an artist, not as a person despite her acronymic emotional theme. The songs themselves are less specific and less personal, fitting with her unknown image at the time as somebody who wasn't holding a major social presence. She was very dismissive with rumours and wanted to keep her private life private. Understandably and admirably mature for someone of her age, but unfortunately that doesn't win you as many fans as opening up does. But her age is a huge consideration here. Like we've said, it's really impressive to have this sort of success so early into her career, but there were unavoidable drawbacks. For one, she can only pull from so much personally as a 21 to 22-year-old with limited life experience, which is when she was writing most of these songs. And speaking of writing, working in the studio and songwriting was still super foreign to her, and something she was learning and getting more comfortable with. So content-wise, she pulled from a variety of sources that were, again, less personal but still able to be felt and connected with from a listener perspective. While this album was still her baby, she allowed other more experienced writers to take the lead as she took a more cautious approach in this debut offering. But this shouldn't take away from what is a great debut album. Like, I'm pulling hairs and just making points that she's made herself, but judging by her sophomore album, there was a clear effort to change what worked here. The album still is really fun and heavily infused with that West Coast Mustard bounce while changing pace here and there. But the emotional theme and skits that spell out her name direct the track list and vibe of the album from start to finish. So 2018 was kind of a huge year for her. Boo'd Up put her on the map and Trip kept her there, building hype for her self-titled debut, which also did amazing. And like it was a fairy tale, her astronomical rise, which established her as a leading face in her favourite genre, the new wave of R&B, was rewarded with one of music's highest honours and something she'd always dreamed of receiving, a Grammy. Life couldn't get much better for her, and it must have been impossible to take it all in. From dreaming of this life to seeing it come to fruition and having your own name up against your musical idols, she was labelled as a herald of R&B, reviving a genre that had seen better days. And all of this success allowed her to headline her own world tour for a whole year, giving her new experiences through travelling and performing and seeing the faces behind the numbers. But after all that was done, 2020 was always planned to be a recording year. Her opportunity to get back into the studio, refreshed and with more experience to continue telling her story and sharing her music. But then the pandemic hit, which threw everyone's plans out the window and forced us to make it up as we go. Which led to a 4-year hiatus from Ella, which might have been a blessing in disguise for her in some ways. Firstly, it gave time for concerns and fears to creep in, namely the sophomore curse. Her debut entry and Grammy success meant that expectations were high, and at first, she was a little intimidated and anxious, doubting if she'd be able to deliver on it. But also with the way the music industry and celebrity culture is, fame can be fleeting, especially for someone as new to the scene as she was, despite her clear success. So taking time away was a risk as temporary fans dropped her and picked up new R&B favourites in the interim. But her time away did allow her to grow, mature, and experience life and think about what she wanted to sound like and what she wanted to say. And she realised that she wanted to dig deeper and offer more of herself to her craft and to her fans through a previously untapped level of vulnerability and sensitivity. To me, it's a clearly conscious effort, partly because she said so and partly because the sound and content is so different. A lot of changes happened within those 4 years and more specifically during the 2 years that she made the album. She matured as a person and learned a lot about herself, especially as many of us did during enforced quarantine and isolation. She learned that she works best in the studio, surrounded by people, energy, and vibes, meaning that Zoom sessions were a no-go and that there was little to no work on the album being done until that was possible. She also learned which writers she felt comfortable sharing her love life with and being vulnerable around, allowing her to really dig deep and treat each studio session as a therapy session. She's described the album as being her life in real time and seems way more personally connected to Heart on My Sleeve than her debut album, likely because it took that much more out of her. But Ella has always referred to herself as an emotional person, and Heart on My Sleeve is an acceptance of that. It also seems heavily rooted in her interest in astrology and star signs, particularly with being a Scorpio. If we view Ella's more distant and personally detached self-titled debut as a Scorpio's hard exterior, then Heart on My Sleeve is the soft and gooey emotional interior available to those she lets in, being her fans that she wants to be more open with. But although Ella pulls back the layers of herself in this sophomore album, her R&B values remain the same. She wants to portray all forms of positive love. This is something she's been advocating from Booed Up to This Is, making true love songs that are innocent and wholesome with a feel-good, positive message. And apart from those songs, she tends to make music that uplifts women and reminds them of their strength, particularly in the wake of a heartbreak, giving them the strength to pick themselves up and not dwell in self-loathing. This is a really important message that Ella wants to get across, and as she perfectly states, people get it confused that a strong woman can't be vulnerable. She doesn't think a strong woman is one that doesn't let the world hurt her or show emotion. A strong woman is one that can get hurt but will pick herself up and not let it defeat her. But of course, because this is near R&B we're talking about, there's still those toxic love songs sprinkled through the project. There's a night and day difference between her self-titled debut album and this sophomore album. You can hear it in the production alone. There's more stripped down and raw instrumentals with darker sounds, suiting her more vulnerable subject matter and contrasting to the more upbeat and bouncy debut. And speaking of the subject matter a little further, Ella stayed true to her storytelling skills but got some help from others to help tell her story and aid her maturity as she deals with relationships and uncertainty. Mary J. Blige offers that maternal advice as she navigates young adulthood, bringing her full circle once more in yet another collaboration with an idol of hers. And Kirk Franklin and his choir bring the gospel sound which also ties back to Ella's childhood in church with her grandma, the minister. All in all, Heart on My Sleeve feels like more of a conscious body of work. Not that it's better or worse, but from an artistic point of view, I think it was undeniably more fulfilling to work on and share the sophomore album than her self-titled debut. Since writing this script, Ella's released a 3-track EP aptly named 3 on the 3rd November. I'm assuming these 3 tracks will be included on the ever-elusive 3rd studio album, or maybe they're just standalone tracks, exclusively living on this EP. Given the time difference between this release and Heart on My Sleeve, we now have an even more contemporary insight into what could be. While it definitely stands out as new and different, in essence, it's still the same Ella we know and love. The songs still generally portray Ella as a self-assured songstress, and 2 of the 3 tracks, content-wise, are very much in-love love songs. The beats are up-tempo and bouncy, and returning to a more classic mustard sound that was few and far between on Heart on My Sleeve. To be honest, if I was placing these tracks, they sonically fit into her self-titled album, but with her more mature and experienced voice, delivery, and songwriting. It sounds like a natural progression of her artistry, only going back to what works so well. Heart on My Sleeve very well could have been a product of the times, whether that's in terms of dealing with the pandemic and loss of freedom, feeling the weight of delivering a sophomore hit following her debut success, or just personal things going on in her life. She clearly wanted to try something different. But 3 feels happier, and the return of this bouncy sound might just reflect the state of Ella's life right now and her upbeat attitude that she wants to share. But what does this mean for her 3rd album? Well, there's a couple things to consider. The reception of her debut album was going to be hard to match, and Heart on My Sleeve definitely didn't receive the same sort of love or contain the same amount of hits. So does Ella try her hardest to make a return to form and turn back the years in hopes of recapturing that audience? I don't think so. Despite this sonic callback, I don't know if that's her intention. Boot Up was unprecedented and unexpected, and definitely not premeditated. In her case anyway, hits aren't specially crafted. In a genre like R&B, hits gravitate based on a feeling that people want and need, and Boot Up showed that an innocent love song can go a long way. But this assumes that Ella cares about pumping out hits, and if she did, she'd be a UK pop artist right now. So if I was predicting what's next, I think it's an extension and update in the life of Ella Mai. Raw, unfiltered, and vulnerable, just like the idols who shaped her. But now she has the maturity and life experience to continue peeling back the layers and make music that will inspire others the way she was inspired. From singing Instagram covers to winning a Grammy, Ella Mai has been on one hell of a rollercoaster ride that started off so high. And through it all, she handled unprecedented fame, rubbed shoulders with icons who she can now call peers, and reinvented herself during an age of self-discovery. But she's ultimately doing what she's always dreamed of doing, making music in the genre that she loves.